Here it is. So after years and years of dreaming, my dream has come true. This is my latest acquisition, a 96 Alpina B8 4.6 Touring. So this is an E36 wagon that Alpina has built. And what's special about this is that it has a V8 in it. So we'll get to the engine bay in a second. Ever since I learned how to drive and getting my first car, which is a 328i, I did quite a lot of reading and research about E36s, and that's when I read about the Alpina B8. It was a crazy project by Alpina where they wanted to do something special for their 30th anniversary. So they put a V8 into an E36 chassis. So they put a V8 in a 3 Series before BMW did for years. I believe the first car you can buy, first 3 Series you can buy from BMW with a V8 was the ultra limited M3 GTR, I believe it was. And then ultimately the E90 M3 obviously came with a V8. This car is in Arctic Silver. I've already gotten some European vanity plates for this car. The car is a little bit dirty because I've been daily driving it the last few weeks. So I definitely don't treat this car as a garage queen, and I do take it out and drive it around town. So let's check out the interior. So it has a blue Alcantara interior. So this interior is actually not original to the car. According to the Alpina spec sheet, this car just had black, plain black leather. However, I believe one of the early owners of the car was a smoker, so the interior was destroyed, and the previous owner was able to get his hands on this Edition 30 interior from a different Alpina E36 and had it retrofitted into this car. So the car does not have power rear windows. I'm debating on whether retrofitting that, but otherwise this car is pretty well equipped. It has the additional Alpina gauges. It has the board computer. I've already installed a BMW Indianapolis Pro radio with Bluetooth. All right, let's get to the engine. There it is. So this is an M60 engine based on the 540i from the E34. Alpina punched it out to 4.6 liters. So the story is that Alpina made a large number of modifications to the body to make this engine fit. However, based on all the research I've been doing and including combing through the parts catalog, that's a little bit overblown because Alpina is including and counting things like welding on additional brackets for the cruise control or the ABS pump, etc. They're including that in the number of modifications that they are making. They did have to change where the steering column comes out of the firewall to be able to clear the headers. They did reinforce the rear subframe mounts, so they welded in the plates similar to an E36 M3, which has reinforcement plates back there. So those are the only real structural things to the body in white that I'm aware of. Obviously, there are new mounts and brackets, etc., for the engine and transmission, but those are the only major things that I'm aware of besides these little brackets that they're welding all over the engine bay for various components. So from the factory, this engine is supposed to make 333 horsepower and 470 newton meters of torque. So I do plan on putting this car on a dyno just to see how much power it actually makes, because supposedly Alpina underrated the thing, and it actually makes quite a lot more. What's also interesting is at 2,000 RPMs, this car makes just as much torque as the peak torque of a Euro E36 M3. So torque is the name of this game, and this car can't be matched compared to an E36. It's actually faster and also better balanced because the block is aluminum, an aluminum alloy, and actually sits further back than an iron block inline six. So it actually you can actually feel it while it handles. Now, of course, it has to do with the suspension geometry as well and the shocks and springs, but I feel like this car handles pretty well out of the box. I don't plan on doing any modifications, major modifications. I plan on just keeping this car mostly stock and keeping it preserved and restored. So you can see there's a Alpina specific airbox, an Alpina specific mass airflow sensor, intake boot, an engine beauty cover. You will notice that it does not have a brake booster because it actually uses a hydraulic unit. That's what this canister is for, power steering and hydraulic brake boosting. You can actually see there's a pressure accumulator mounted down there. So it's actually very similar to an E34, E31, or E32 from the early 90s. The coolant expansion tank comes from a Euro M3, so that's why the reservoir sits back there. And the car from the factory did not come with hood insulation because it did not clear from the bigger engine in here. So this car is number 9 of 27 in the world. The Alpina B8s saw about a little bit over 200 in production numbers, but only 27 of them were made in touring form. The rarest variant being the convertible, which I believe is only at 24 units produced. This car does have a little bit of a history. It was in a crash several years ago, but was taken apart and completely rebuilt. So it is not 100% perfect, but my intention is to drive and enjoy this car and not really keep it as a museum piece, even though I do plan on keeping it in pretty good shape and preserving it and fixing little things here and there. So there's going to be no guilt in putting tons and tons of miles on this car. So the car is definitely not perfect. There are little things here and there that I'll have to sort out. I think there might be a very small vacuum leak somewhere in the car, which is a common occurrence on the M60. So once my B3 is done, my intention is to start taking this thing apart and fixing all the little problems. There's probably a gasket somewhere or a vacuum line somewhere underneath all of that needs to be replaced. So every piece of rubber down there will be swapped out with something new just to track down where that vacuum leak is. I think it's a very small one because I tried to use a smoke machine and wasn't able to figure out where it was coming from. The symptoms include a little bit of a rough idle at times. It's really not that noticeable, but it's sometimes a stumble on idle. I also hooked up the BMW diagnostic tool to the car and noticed that sometimes the NOx sensor will randomly go off. So I think the NOx sensors are also bad, so those will be swapped out. That's also underneath inside the V of the engine. The car also has depot headlights, which aren't bad. However, I have a brand new set of Bosch ALS units which will be going in. The corner markers are also depot, and I'll be replacing them with OE BMW. Other than that, the car is fairly well maintained. I did have the car dry ice blasted about a week or so ago, cleaned up really nicely down under. There was a valve cover leak at one point, which the previous owner did sort out, but the entire front of the engine was covered in grime and oil. So dry ice blasting really cleaned that up, and it looks brand new right now. The dry ice blasting also just uncovered a little bit of surface rust on some of the subframe components, mostly the rear. So eventually when I have to do the rear subframe mounts and bushings and other rear control arms, I'll take the whole thing out and just have it media blasted and then powder coated just to clean everything up. Other than the rear subframe surface rust, the body is rust-free and clean. That quarter panel over there is new because of the accident that I mentioned. So that corner has been fully repaired. The frame rails are straight. Some of these bowline cables, their plastic covering has chipped away or fallen off. These are Alpina specific parts, but hopefully they're still available. Functionally, everything is fine, so maybe I'll just leave them alone for now. These wheels are technically different from my B3 because this is an earlier car. I believe September is when they switched over to the soft line wheels. These are called the hard line wheels because of the angles in which the rim, the transition of the angles on the wheel, and also the valve stem is on the outside, not in the center. So you can see that these wheels are somewhat angular from the face to the inner barrel, compared to the B3, where the angles and lines seem a little softer and more gentle. And also the valve stem on this car is in the center, behind the center cap. So those hardline wheels on the B8 are correct for its build date. The previous owner also had these custom black Alpina pinstripes installed. So the car from the factory came with gold pinstripes. However, gold did not contrast very well with silver, so I guess the previous owner put on black ones, which I do think look really nice. However, trying to get any bits and pieces repaired, if it comes off, it's going to be difficult because it looked like it was laid by hand, these angles. So I'll have to figure that out. Maybe one day I'll just return it back to completely stock form with the gold pinstripes, but to be determined. So for now, this car is going to be in my rotation as a daily driver while the B3 is being worked on. And once the B3 is all sorted out, then this car will start its restoration and preservation process. But until then, I'll be enjoying it day to day, enjoying canyon drives, as well as a car show now and then.